Whiria te taura, te kaia te korowai tuakiri. Kia rongo I te mana, kia rongo I te Māori, kia mā koha, kia mahana, kia wātea, tūraha. Ko te mihi tuatahi ki te atua nāna nei ngā mea katoa. Ko te mihi tuarua ki te hunga mate, haere atu rā. Ko te mihi tuaruturu ki te hunga, ora kua hui mai nei tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everyone for listening to this broadcast. My name's Katene Peretini. I work for Community Law South Auckland, and I am a community engagement or advocate based out at Papakura and Ōtara. Last week we spoke about tenancies, types of tenancies, the new pets rules. Today we're going to look at what it's like or what to look for when you're renting. What your rights and responsibilities are, information for new tenants. Now, I must add that it's really important that you understand all your rights and responsibilities, and that there's a very good web page under the tenancy services that will cover all, if not everything you can possibly want to know around tenancy. All landlords and tenants have responsibilities under the Residential Tenancies Act 1986. Landlords' responsibilities. When renting out a property, landlords need to make sure the property is in reasonable condition. Now, reasonable is subjective, but you can talk with your landlord if you think something's not quite right with your property. The landlords must let the tenant have quiet enjoyment of the property, meet all relevant building, health and safety standards. Now there's a Healthy Homes Standards and certificate that landlords must have before they tenant the property, and we'll talk more about that in other episodes. The landlord handles any abandoned goods in a correct way. So if you leave your property and you leave some stuff behind, you have a particular amount of time in which you have to recover them. Landlords can't just throw them out straight away. So there are rules around that. Inform the tenant if the property is for sale. That's really important because, as you know, when you put a property on sale, it's going to be subject to people wanting to come and view the property. So that would interrupt your normal, quiet enjoyment of the property, and they must do their due diligence and give you a significant notice. The landlord has, if they have an agent instead of themselves, if they are out of New Zealand for more than 21 days. The landlord can't seize the tenant's goods for any reason at all, and they can't interfere with the supply of any services to the premises. I don't know why they would, but they can't do that unless it's necessary to avoid danger to a person or to allow repairs. If you're a landlord at a boarding house, you will also have other responsibilities. Now, boarding houses is a different topic, and I did cover it briefly in the previous podcast. That brings a lot more responsibilities around that. Tenants' responsibilities. So when you're renting a property, tenants need to pay the rent on time, without exception. Keep the property reasonably clean and tidy. Let the landlord know about any damages or repairs straight away. Now, we do find that there's a few tenants that fear that if they let the landlord know about any damage and so forth, that there might be some issues with the landlord. Now, I would always advocate to any tenant that keep open lines of communication with your landlords, and always diary note date and time of when you've contacted your landlords and what the discussion was, and just a brief summary, so that when, say in a month's time, that you need to go back over these things because there's another issue that's cropped up, then you've got everything already set up in order for you, if you have to, go through to tenancy. But you'd hope that you wouldn't need to. You must pay for all your outgoings like power, gas and internet, etc. Use the property mainly for residential purposes rather than business activities. So to run a business out of a residential property, that's something that you're going to have to discuss with your landlord, but it is not what you should be doing. You can't leave the property, you must leave the property clean, tidy and clear of rubbish and possessions. Leave all keys with the landlord when you move out. Leave all items that were supplied with the tenancy. You must not stop paying rent if the landlord hasn't done repairs. There is avenues for you to remedy that. You must not damage the premises. You must not disturb the neighbours or the landlords of other tenants. You must not disturb the neighbours or the landlord's other tenants. You must not make any alterations to the property without the landlord's written consent. You must not use the property for any unlawful purpose, and you must not have more than the maximum number of occupants listed in the tenancy agreement. We have had quite a few that have been in that predicament. It is important that you keep everything clear to your landlord and no surprises. Landlords and tenants, they both have a responsibility to each other. They must make sure the tenancy agreement is in writing. They must keep their contact details up to date, and you must not change the locks without permission of the landlord. There are other significant responsibilities, especially when it's coming to renting to disabled tenants. Disabled people make up to 24% of New Zealand's populations. They have a wide range of diverse needs, and it's important that they have a safe, accessible place to live. There's a range of services and support available, and they're all listed on the Tenancy Services website. Making changes to your rental home. Recent changes to tenancy law could make things easier for tenants with disabilities. From 11th of February 2021, landlords can't decline a tenant's request to make changes to their rental property as long as the change is minor. This change will make it easier for tenants to add fixtures like grab rails, visual fire alarms or doorbells. And there is a link to how tenants can do that. Now that we've covered the rights and responsibilities, it's really important to understand the difference between tenants and flatmates. If you sign a tenancy agreement with your landlord, you're a tenant. You're legally responsible for the place you're covered by the Residential Tenancies Act 1986. If you're a flatmate, someone else signs the tenancy agreement but lets you share the flat. A homeowner asks you to live in their house with them and rents a room to you. That's the definition of a flatmate. Flatmates are not covered by the Act. Flatting for the first time, it's important to know the difference between tenants and flatmates. Moving into your first flat can be exciting and overwhelming. It is important to know your rights and responsibilities when you finally find your new home. The term flatting is used to describe sharing a rental property with other people, but if you are a flatmate rather than a tenant, you may have different rights. The Residential Tenancies Act, as I've mentioned before, 1986, only covers tenants and landlords, not flatmates. So it's a flatmate is someone else. If someone else signs the tenancy agreement but lets you share the flat, you are a flatmate. Flatmates live in the property but are not part of the tenancy agreement. Flatmates are not responsible to the landlord for the rent and the state of the property. They are the responsibility of the tenant for their share of the rent. Flatmates are not covered by the Act. Flat sharing agreements between tenants and other flatmates are not covered by the Act. If you are a flatmate, record your agreement with your tenant in writing. You should only use this flat sharing agreement if you are a flat sharing arrangement, such as for flatmates or boarders. This does not apply to boarding homes, tenants in boarding house tenancies or other living agreements. Solving problems between tenants and flatmates. Only a landlord-tenant disputes are heard by the Tenancy Tribunal. If there are any issues between tenants or flatmates, you can go to the Disputes Tribunal. If you want advice about flatmate disputes, you could go to community law centres or citizens advice bureaus. Right, one hot topic that I'm really keen on covering here today is our healthy home standards. Now, the healthy home standards are minimum standards for heating, insulation, ventilation, moisture, ingress, drainage and drought stopping in rental properties. The healthy home standards are the minimum standards for heating, insulation, ventilation, etc. All rental properties must comply with the healthy home standards unless an exemption has been applied for. Landlords are responsible for ensuring their properties meet the standards and continue to over time. These standards help tenants keep their homes warm and dry and help landlords achieve cost savings in the long-term maintenance of their property. Why are these standards important? Well, more than 600,000 households rent in New Zealand, and research shows rental properties are poorer quality than owner-occupied homes. Research also shows a link between cold, damp and mouldy homes and poorer health. By improving the quality of rental homes, New Zealanders who rent will experience improved health as well as lower medical costs. Warmer and drier homes are also less likely to have issues with mould or mildew damage, better protecting a landlord's investments. Heating. Now, landlords must provide one or more fixed heaters that can directly heat the main living room. The heaters must be acceptable types and must meet the minimum heating capacity required for your main living room. Insulation. Ceiling and underfloor insulation has been compulsory in all rental homes since 1 July 2019. The Healthy Homes Insulation Standard builds on the current regulations, and some existing insulation will need to be topped up or replaced. Ventilation. Each livable space must have a window or door that opens to the outside and can be fixed in the open position. Kitchens and bathrooms must also have an extractor fan to remove moisture. Moisture, ingress and drainage. A rental property must have efficient drainage, guttering and downpipes for the removal of stormwater, surface water and groundwater. Where there is an enclosed subfloor, a ground moisture barrier is required. Now, draft stopping. Landlords must block any unreasonable gaps or holes in walls, ceilings, windows, floors and doors that cause noticeable drafts. When the standards do not apply, in some situations a property is not required to meet the healthy home standards or parts of the standards. This is called an exemption. If the property does not meet the standards, landlords who do not meet their obligations under the Healthy Home Standards are in breach of the Residential Tenancies Act 1986 and may face consequences like financial penalties. Landlords who are yet to bring their property up to standard but are not sure where to start, you must read the Healthy Homes Toolkit for Landlords on the Tenancy Services website. What you should include in your tenancy agreement. New, renewed or varied tenancy agreements must include a signed statement with details of the property's current level of compliance with the standards. We have a template you can use for this on the Tenancy Services webpage. Landlords who do not include this statement when required could face a financial penalty of up to $500 for each tenancy or other enforcement action. The records you need to keep. Landlords must keep all records and documents that show how they are complying with the Healthy Home Standard. Tenants can request information about compliance with the Healthy Home Standards. Landlords must provide this information to tenants within 21 days. Now that's really important for tenants to understand, that they can request that compliance standard report, and it is important for you to read it, especially if you have concerns about the healthy standards in your home. So bonds. There are two types of bonds a landlord can charge: a general bond and a pet bond. What a general bond is money the landlord can charge a tenant at the start of a tenancy. The tenant pays the bond and the landlord lodges or deposits it with tenancy services, who hold it during the tenancy. It is used at the end of the tenancy to cover any money that is owed. If there is no money owed at the end of the tenancy, tenants should get a refund of their bond. What is a pet bond? A pet bond is money the landlord can charge a tenant if they have been given consent for the tenant to keep a pet in the property. The tenant pays the bond and the landlord lodges it with tenancy services, who hold it during the tenancy. Is used to cover any pet-related damage that is more than fair wear and tear. If there is no pet-related damage, tenants should get a bond refund when the tenancy ends or when they stop keeping a pet, whichever comes first. Charging a bond. Landlords can charge a bond to cover potential costs during the tenancy. Tenants can pay the bond either to the landlord or directly to tenancy services if the landlord approves to do this. If the tenant is a flatmate but not named on the tenancy agreement, they can pay their bond to the head tenant. If the tenant pays the bond to the landlord must pay it to the tenancy services when they lodge it. The landlord must provide the tenant with a receipt. If the tenant wants to pay the bond directly to tenancy services, they need to get the approval of the landlord. If the landlord approves, they can nominate the tenant as a payee when they lodge the bond. The tenant needs an email address, as tenancy services will send them an email. The email has a web link for the payee to click on to access and make the payment. There are some avenues where you can get some financial help: bond grant, work and income, or accommodation security cover grant from work and income. If the tenant pays the bond to the landlord must write a receipt and give it to the tenant. The receipt must include the date the bond was paid, if the money is for general bond or pet bond, the amount of the bond, the tenancy's name, the property address and the landlord's signature. The landlord must, in most situations, landlords must lodge a general bond, pet bond or bond top-up payment with tenancy services. Property inspections are important. They can help with bond refund applications at the end of the tenancy. We recommend the tenant and landlord do a property inspection before the tenant moves in. This is to check the condition of the property, and it can be recorded in a property report. During the tenancy and when it ends, the report can be useful as evidence if there is a problem or dispute. You can download a form on the tenancy services for initial property inspection. Actually, Tenancy Service has got a wonderful website for that. So I think we can cover water and wastewater. Now, most of this is all on the Tenancy Services webpage. So, water and wastewater charges. Landlords must make sure enough water is available at your rental property. If there is no piped water supply, the landlord must make sure enough water can be collected and stored. If the property is part of a unit title complex, the body corporate rules form part of the tenancy agreement. Landlords should tell tenants if the rules regulate water supply among the units. Who pays for fixed water charges? Water suppliers charge for wastewater in different ways, which varies around the country. In some cases, A portion of the water charges may include a fixed charge for incoming fresh water or outgoing wastewater. If the supplier charges a fixed amount for water, regardless of whether the property is occupied or not, the landlord is responsible for paying those charges. If the supplier only charges a fixed amount for water when the property is occupied, the tenant is responsible for paying those charges. Now, who pays for metered water charges? A metered water supply allows a water supplier to charge for the amount of water used. The tenant pays for any water charges if the property has a separate water meter. The water supplier calculates water charges based on metered use. The charges can be exclusively attributed to the tenant's use of the property. Otherwise, it's the landlord that pays for the water charges. Some suppliers calculate wastewater based on how much metered water that they supply to the property. The landlord can ask the tenant to pay for the wastewater they produce in this situation, as a charge is attributed to the tenant's use. I've covered as much as I can in this podcast, but our next podcast will mainly focus on maintenance and inspections. Thank you.
Hey.